Welcome back to this special program. I'm coming to you live from Xiamen, the venue of the BRICS summit. But the summit itself has been overshadowed in many ways by developments in North Korea. Just a couple of days before this summit kicked off, we had the hydrogen bomb test announcement by the North Koreans, and that, of course, has sent global markets into a tailspin ever since, including the Indian markets. The sense here in Xiamen, and particularly the Chinese, is that this is not the first time that the North Koreans have done this. Even before last year's G20, which was hosted in Hangzhou in eastern China, there was a big missile test that the North Koreans had done. So there is a sense here in China that the North Koreans have a habit of doing this just to scuttle important meetings that happen in China. And two, I think the Chinese also want to dispel this notion that somehow they have undue leverage or influence over the North Koreans. Yes, China trades with North Korea more than any other country does. But in comparison, I mean, $7 billion is what Beijing and Pyongyang trade. Compare that to any of the major countries that China trades with. With the US, they trade more than $500 billion. With Japan, with whom they've had frosty relations for a number of years now, they still trade more than $350 billion. So the Chinese want to dispel this notion that somehow they have undue leverage with the North Koreans. Let me go back to the conversation, and maybe I can ask Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal. North Korea also was mentioned in today's joint declaration, but interestingly, the language there is pretty much similar to what the Chinese have taken, even calling for a direct dialogue between the parties concerned, essentially saying, asking Washington that if you want to solve the North Korean problem, then the onus is not entirely on us. You've got to play your part as well, and that could possibly include direct dialogue.
Yeah. Before I answer the question, may I make a couple of points which are relevant with regard to the Xiamen summit and the joint statement. One is that, and this also to underline that India has scored some kind of success there. There is no reference to the Belt and Road Initiative in the joint statement at all. Whereas the Chinese had wanted to leverage this summit and create a connection between BRICS and their Belt and Road Initiative, and which was the sense of their expanding the BRICS group to include the developing countries. And the 5 countries they have chosen, if you look at them carefully, actually have very little to contribute to economic development globally, or are absolutely not relevant economic players. But these are countries which are of special interest to China. And this is something that we have to be careful about, because China is trying to dilute the BRICS formation and expanding it, dilute these 5 countries that are forming this group and their importance within the group by enlarging it and bringing in countries where they have interests, and therefore this will become a platform for extending their global regional and Asian leadership, etc., etc. But coming back to the question you asked, actually they have strongly deplored the nuclear test conducted by the DPRK, so it's not as if they have glossed over this. And secondly, in terms of resolving this through peaceful means and direct dialogue of all parties concerned, I think this is a sensible position to take. After all, the manner in which Trump has been threatening military action against North Korea, and all of us know that the consequences of that would be absolutely terrible for the region, and especially for South Korea, and that this is really not a viable option. So the option is some kind of a direct dialogue, which in a sense had happened in the past. And when North Korea had agreed to suspend its nuclear tests, etc., etc., and the United States has promised that they would build 2 nuclear power reactors in North Korea. And then President Bush walked out of this understanding, and then the North Koreans started resuming their tests. So I think there's a lot of good sense in the recommendation that there should be some form of a dialogue between all the parties concerned, rather than look for military options which are A, not feasible, and B, if recklessly pursued, could cause huge problems for the entire region, especially for a large economy like South Korea. So I don't see anything wrong with that. But finally, I'd like also to make the point with regard to all the economic content of this. Look, China, yes, it is becoming a very important global player in economic terms. But all that is a lot of wishful thinking, because there are a lot of differences and disparities and divergence of views and the stage of the economies between this BRICS countries themselves. And none of them would like Chinese domination to expand to such an extent that China builds upon that to actually work towards a potential G2 or whatever else it is. And this is what China's purpose is, to use the BRICS platform for that purpose. And many of the things that they are advocating actually directly and indirectly will boost China's role in the global economy. So look at, for example, our own bilateral deficit with China and the manner in which, using NTTs and all, they have allowed this deficit to balloon to unsustainable proportions. So they must first act on that bilaterally and build that kind of confidence between India and China before they go on to a larger global platform where they talk about all sorts of things. So I would not. Yes, it is. We can't ignore what all has been said, but there is nothing that these 5 countries can do on their own, because all of them are tied, or at least China and India are tied very heavily, and China in particular, to the United States market and to the Western markets. And there's no way they can carry on this kind of confrontation with the West, because their own future prosperity and stability is dependent on this.
Mr. Sibul and Mr. Das, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us and shedding light on the declaration today. Zaka, thank you very much for being with us. We are short on time. I have to wrap up. Thank you indeed for joining us. And of course, Zaka will continue to get us the details of what comes out of this conference tomorrow as well. The conference is on. Thanks very much for staying with us.